This module will focus on the evaluation requirements and process for both initial evaluations and re-evaluations. The law requires that students with a suspected disability are provided with a full and individual evaluation. It's imperative that the ARC review all required documentation in order to plan and conduct a full and individual evaluation. The ARC chairperson must ensure that information used to make decisions regarding the evaluation are documented. All necessary information, such as RTI data, district, school, and classroom assessments, and parental input, must be documented and reviewed by the ARC. After the Admissions and Release Committee accepts a referral for an initial evaluation for special education services, the ARC must develop an evaluation plan. Kentucky regulations state that the district will ensure that within 60 school days following the receipt of the parent consent, that the child is evaluated, and if eligible, specially designed instruction and related services will be provided in accordance with the individual education program. You begin the count when the parent signs consent to evaluate and it's received by the district. Then you have 60 school days until services begin. It's the ARC chairperson's responsibility to ensure that all evaluations are completed. Once written permission from the parent is obtained, a team of people who work with the child will evaluate the child's abilities and needs. They will use tests and procedures, such as individual tests, a review of schoolwork and school records, behavior observations, interviews, and rating scales. All of these individual tests and procedures are used to be certain that the evaluation is valid. The law says the child or youth will be individually evaluated at no cost to the parent. The full and individual evaluation must be done by a team or group of people who are trained to give the tests and procedures and interpret the results. This is called a multidisciplinary team. At least one of the people on the multidisciplinary team must have knowledge in the area of the disability the child is suspected to have. Several different tests and procedures are to be used, not just one. Eligibility for specially designed instruction and related services cannot be based on a single test or procedure. All tests must be given in the language a child uses and in a way that the child can best answer. This is considered non-discriminatory testing. When the evaluation is completed, the parent is invited to the ARC meeting to discuss the results of the evaluation. In order to plan an appropriate evaluation, the ARC must review the completed referral. This includes documented evidence of repeated assessments of achievement. For example, universal screenings, standardized group testing data, and curriculum-based measurements. And documentation of the results of repeated assessments of achievements that were provided to the parent. And documented research-based interventions conducted in the suspected area, and this includes an analysis of the data. The ARC identifies a suspected disability and plans an appropriate evaluation on an evaluation planning form or consent to evaluate for services. A review, triangulation, and analysis of the referral information for initial evaluation or progress data of the child for re-evaluation. The evaluation plan must be sufficient to support the evidence of a suspected disability and the tests and procedures necessary to assess the child. The link at the bottom of this slide provides access to an evaluation plan and consent form typically used by school districts across the state. After reviewing the referral, The ARC discusses and then documents on the evaluation planning form the evaluation components that will be conducted. It's critical that all the areas of suspected disability are discussed and the necessary assessments are documented correctly. An assessment in an area cannot be conducted unless it's documented on this form. The evaluation information must align with the evaluation planning form previously completed by the ARC. The Kentucky Department of Education requires a minimum of 2 observations for all disability categories. These must be formal observations for all initial evaluations. The Kentucky Department of Education's Division of Learning Services position maintains this, that behavior observations are required as part of the evaluation for every category of suspected disability. For further information, please reference the DLS policy letter dated April 3, 2012. In 2010, the Kentucky Department of Education issued a policy letter regarding evaluation and eligibility. One of the areas identified in the letter is around observations. If you've not read the letter, please go to the Kentucky Department of Education website, or you can access the resource section of this training to obtain a copy of the letter. The requirements for observations as part of the evaluation process is found in 2 sections of Kentucky's IDEA regulations. KAR 707 1-300 Section 4 and KAR 1310 707 Section 1 Subsection 3. The Kentucky Department of Education interprets this to mean multiple observations. Remember, for all initial evaluations, the observations must include at least 2 formal observations. Many times, more observations may be needed to gain a triangulation of the data. Kentucky regulations state, as part of an initial evaluation, if appropriate, or as part of any reevaluation, the ARC and other qualified professionals shall review existing evaluation data on the child, including current classroom-based, local, or state assessments and classroom observations, and observations by teachers and related service providers. So, observations can include formal and informal observations. Both are very important to the evaluation and eligibility process. Informal observations are documentations that you already have. They do not require consent but provide very important information. This is information that is typically collected on an ongoing basis, such as progress monitoring data for RTI or IEP goals, anecdotal notes, and classwork samples. Formal observations, often referred to as behavior observations, require parental consent prior to the observation. Formal observations must be conducted by trained personnel identified by the district. So let's practice what we've learned. Anecdotal notes. Teacher input through email. Teacher input through questionnaire or survey. Progress monitoring data. Teacher input on conference summary notes. And observation of a student in school settings by trained personnel. As you can see, the bulk of the types of observations that are listed here are informal observations, except for the last one, observations of a student in school settings by trained personnel. Observations also play a key role in answering the question of whether the disability has an adverse effect on the student's educational progress. Adverse effect is defined in the Kentucky regulations as the progress of the child is impeded by the disability to the extent that the educational performance is significantly and consistently below the level of similar age peers. Educational performance includes the areas of academic, social, and functional performance. For reevaluation purposes, classroom-based observations include a combination of at least 2 forms of current informal teacher observations, such as progress monitoring data, anecdotal notes, or documented teacher input about student performance, or at least 2 formal teacher observations, or a combination of both A and B. If the ARC determines formal observations are needed, prior written parental consent must be obtained. The exception is the category of a specific learning disability. For every evaluation, even if a reevaluation is a review of existing data, there must be formal observations. However, recent guidance from Kentucky Department of Education states that for SLD eligibility, only 1 formal observation is required. But the ARC may plan and conduct more if necessary to determine eligibility. Therefore, parental consent will always be required when an evaluation is conducted. For further information, there is a link embedded in the bottom of this slide that will take you to the SLD eligibility guidance document. You may also access the SLD eligibility guidance document on the Kentucky Department of Education's website. Parent input. Regulations state that the ARC reviews and discusses the evaluation and information brought by the parent or parents or completed by the parent or parents. Parent input is a required piece of every evaluation and eligibility decision. Parent input can be gathered through the social developmental history, adaptive rating scales, questionnaires, or surveys. Sometimes, parents may have an outside evaluation conducted at their own expense and present this to the ARC. The ARC must consider this information and can, if they choose, use this as part of the evaluation documentation. But the ARC may also determine it's not appropriate to use as part of the educational decision as to whether or not this student has a suspected disability under IDEA. Methods for determining eligibility for specific learning disability. The Admissions and Release Committee must decide at the evaluation planning stage if they intend to use Method A or Method B, which are identified in Kentucky as either the response to intervention model or the significant discrepancy method. It's also important to consult your district policies and procedures about which method is available for use in the evaluation of specific learning disabilities in your school district. It's important to note that at the evaluation planning meeting, the ARC must decide whether they will use the response to intervention method or the significant discrepancy method to determine SLD eligibility. The decision as to which method to use cannot be made after the evaluation is conducted. This may have an impact on what type of assessments are completed and the data that needs to be collected. Remember, this decision is made during the evaluation stage and before SLD determination. It's important to know and understand your district policies and procedures around evaluations for special education. Consent. The ARC at this point has determined that they suspect the student has a disability, what the disability is, and have planned a full and complete evaluation. They now must get written, informed consent from the parent before conducting any evaluation. This is the first of 3 consents required in due process. Consent should be documented both on the consent form and on the conference summary notes. Consent for evaluation results. The ARC chairperson must see that all parties have access to a copy of all evaluations. The district should have policies and procedures in place for when the parents are given a copy. The ARC reviews the evaluation to see if all requested evaluations are part of the report or available to the members. The ARC reviews all evaluation data and input from the parents and the specific criterion for the suspected disability. Reevaluations. Let's now take some time to discuss reevaluations. Regulations require the school district to reevaluate the child on or before the 3rd anniversary of the meeting when the ARC determined the child was eligible. This review is the triennial review, or 3-year reeval. The ARC must meet with a parent or guardian to plan for this reevaluation. Written permission is again obtained from the parent or guardian for any formal testing. So why reevaluate? Reevaluation is needed to determine if the student continues to meet the eligibility requirements. It helps answer the question, does the child continue to have a disability? Does the disability continue to have an adverse effect on the student's educational performance? And does the child continue to need special education services? Reevaluations are based on the individual child's needs. Once again, it's not just a predetermined battery of tests. Reevaluations occur no less than every 3 years or on the 3rd anniversary. Reevaluations must be planned by the ARC in conformity with Kentucky regulations addressing child find, evaluation, and reevaluation. Reevaluations require informed written parental consent. Essentially, reevaluation should be planned by the ARC, same as the initial evaluation, and according to the regulations guiding evaluation. The ARC must review and document current data, including IEP progress monitoring. A reevaluation shall be conducted every 3 years. There are exceptions to this. The local education agency shall not have to conduct a reevaluation if, after review of the existing data, the ARC determines that a reevaluation is not necessary to determine whether the child continues to be eligible for services, that it's not warranted to determine the education or related service needs, and the parents or teacher do not request a reevaluation. All existing data and current progress monitoring data must be documented. The ARC can review this documentation and determine no further testing is needed to determine eligibility. However, remember the observation requirements. There must still be at least 2 informal observations. And if the disability is a specific learning disability, the ARC must plan and get consent for at least 1 formal observation. The ARC decides what assessments, if any, are required for the reevaluation. And it should be noted that a parent always has the right to request a reevaluation, even if the ARC determines one is not necessary. If the district uses the review of existing data document on Infinite Campus, this information is included. If not, the Admissions and Release Committee must make sure this is documented. It's required by Kentucky regulations. To utilize existing data, parents will be provided prior written notice of the ARC decision that includes 1. The reason it was decided that there was sufficient existing data. 2. there was no need for additional data, and 3, that the parent has the right to request an assessment. Here are some guiding questions that may assist an ARC in determining what assessments, if any, need to be conducted as part of the reevaluation. Does the current progress monitoring of IEP goals indicate whether the child's educational performance continues to be significantly and consistently below the level of similar age peers? In other words, an adverse effect. Secondly, what do the current classroom-based assessments, including IEP progress monitoring, and observations from teachers and related services providers indicate? A minimum of 2. Third, what do the evaluation and information brought by the student's parent or parents indicate? Reevaluation is required before dismissal from special education services. However, the ARC can determine what the reevaluation consists of. Reevaluation is to be done at least every 3 years. However, a reevaluation can be done any time before if the student is not making educational progress, or something has happened in the child's life that would change their needs and subsequently their individual educational programming. A reevaluation is not required before the termination of a student's eligibility due to graduation with a diploma or exceeding the age of eligibility. If the district plans to exit the student with a certificate prior to the student's 21st birthday, a reevaluation is required. Transfer students. If a child with a disability transfers between school districts within the same academic year within Kentucky and had an IEP in effect, the child shall be provided a free and appropriate public education, or FAPE, including services comparable to those described in the previous IEP. These services shall be provided in consultation with the parents and until the LEA adopts the previous IEP or develops and implements a new IEP. Comparable means the services provided will be as close as possible to those the student was receiving in the previous district until the ARC can meet and make the appropriate changes. Remember, once the student is enrolled in your district, you are now responsible for the decisions made. It's important to review all previous information, collect any needed data, conduct assessments if needed, and make the appropriate decisions for the student. Transfer students in the evaluation process. Evaluations and assessments of children with disabilities that transfer from one district to another in the same academic year shall be coordinated with the previous and current schools as necessary and as expeditiously as possible to ensure prompt completion of a full evaluation. This refers to students already in the referral or reevaluation process in a previous school. If a student transfers to another district during their reevaluation or initial evaluation process, the 60-school day timeline is not in effect. The receiving district must meet with the parents and review all documentations provided by the previous district, and develop a plan to complete the evaluation with an appropriate timeline to determine eligibility. This does not allow the district to delay identification and services. If a student from out of state enrolls in Kentucky with a current IEP, the district must provide a free appropriate public education with comparable services, just like in an in-state transfer. However, the ARC must determine Kentucky eligibility. The eligibility requirements for certain categories differ from state to state. The ARC must treat this as an initial evaluation unless previously identified in Kentucky and adhere to the 60 school day timeline. If a student enrolls in a Kentucky district with a current IEP, the district must implement that IEP to the maximum extent possible. Kentucky eligibility must be determined. The ARC must review all documentation to determine what evaluation information must be gathered. The Kentucky Department of Education is in the process of developing a question and answer regarding the requirements for in-state and out-of-state transfers. Independent educational evaluations. Regulations state that independent education evaluations must be conducted by a qualified examiner not employed by the local education agency. They may be paid at public expense or by parents. Be mindful, a parent always has the right to an independent educational evaluation, which must be considered. A parent is entitled to one independent education evaluation at public expense each time the public agency conducts an evaluation with which the parent does not agree to the results. Now let's say you've decided to evaluate, but the parent wants an independent evaluation. A parent of a child with a disability shall have a right to obtain an independent educational evaluation of the child. A parent's request for an independent education evaluation is subject to the parent's disagreement with a complete evaluation the local education agency has been given the opportunity to conduct on the child. They must provide information to the parent about where an independent education evaluation may be obtained and the criteria for the independent education evaluation. You may ask for the parent's reasons why they object to the district evaluation. However, they do not have to respond. A district cannot deny its action while waiting for a response from the parent. If the district determines that the request is unwarranted, they can initiate a due process hearing to show that its evaluation is appropriate, or demonstrate in a due process hearing that the evaluation obtained by the parent did not meet criteria. If the final decision of the hearing officer is that the district's evaluation is appropriate, the parent still has the right to an independent education evaluation, but not at public expense. If the parent obtains an independent education evaluation at private expense, and it meets the agency criteria, results of the evaluation shall be considered by the district in any decision made with respect to the provision of a free, appropriate public education. If the district determines that the request is warranted, ensure that the independent education evaluation is provided at public expense. The qualifications of the examiner shall be the same as the criteria the district uses when it initiates an evaluation. To conclude this module, here are some important reminders. The ARC must review the completed referral and identify a suspected disability prior to planning the evaluation process. The ARC must obtain parental consent prior to conducting any of the formal assessments. Once the district receives this consent, the 60 school day timeline begins. This is true for initial evaluations. The evaluation components on the planning form must match the components assessed during the evaluation. Finally, every student suspected of having a disability must be provided a full and individual evaluation. Other considerations. A reevaluation must be conducted at least every 3 years. A review of existing data may be used as the reevaluation unless the parent requests an evaluation be conducted. Transfer students, in-state and out-of-state, with current IEPs must be provided with comparable services listed on the IEP until the ARC meets to either determine Kentucky eligibility and/or review and revise the IEP. Finally, parents have the right to request an independent educational evaluation only after the district has completed their evaluation. This last slide contains resources that may be informative and helpful. Links embedded within the Kentucky Department of Education on this slide will take you to eligibility policy letters and a webinar, guidance documents for the development of individual educational programming and lesson plan development, the Kentucky System of Interventions or RTI document, the SLD eligibility guidance document, and Q&As that address collaborative teaching practices, restraint, and seclusion. You may also find the compliance record review document that's updated annually. This concludes the module on the evaluation for our chairpersons, module